Well, it was a number of weeks ago that Pastor Josh helped lead our pastoral staff to lay out a structure for this year's missions conference. The purpose was not simply to inform you about what's going on in the various fields and have all of our missionaries preach, but really the purpose of this conference was to educate you and inspire you with the particular philosophy that we have laid out here at Lebanon Baptist Church. We want our church all to be on the same page. Of course, one of the Old Testament books, how can two walk together except they be agreed? And we want to walk together and be agreed about what we're aiming at as a church. We want you to know our particular strategy. As Josh mentioned last night, this is not simply the only strategy. Just like in basketball, there may be a lot of different types of defenses and offenses, but you need to have a strategy. And we have developed one, and we want to be successful with it. The rules of the game are all the same, and we need to make sure that we know the rules of the game, but then ultimately, how are we going to go about trying to reach this world for the sake of the gospel? So the conference really was started out with Pastor Scott laying really the foundation of all of missions. What is it all about? We are to proclaim the glory of God to the world. That's the foundation of missions. We have missions because God's glory is so often overshadowed in life. And then Ryan McCamick gave the message on Sunday morning about the Great Commission, and where God really lays out the exact plan that he would have for all of us when it comes to giving ourselves to this great task of making more disciples. And then Chris Anderson spoke on Sunday evening on the goal of church planting. We ought not to just simply focus in on, you could say, digging wells and doing good. Ultimately, we need to be planting churches. And the way that God is going to display his glory is by churches being planted all across the globe. And then last night, Pastor Josh focused on how our church is practically involved in supporting missionaries and kind of how we have laid out this plan. Tonight, they have asked me to focus on the topic of sending, or particularly sending our own. Sending our people to be a part of this great enterprise. And this is something that should be fresh on all of our minds, as we were even reminded of just a few minutes ago. It was 3 weeks ago, we sent out one of our own families to Southeast Asia, one that was very dear to us, who we will not see for a good amount of time. It was the following week that we had numbers more of our church family depart to be the seed group of a new church plant in Kennesaw with the Huffmans. And you just got a report in reference to that. You saw pictures of dear family members from this church going to help get that started. Sending our own is something that we want to be part of our DNA. In fact, our vision statement, as we have shared with you on numbers of occasions, lays out this focus, and it's this: to raise up and to send our own to establish churches in Atlanta, the Salt Lake Valley, Indonesia, and the world. Of course, it was a number of years ago that we decided to focus on these areas in order to invest in these, you could say, certain markets. We want to learn these areas really well. We want to know what cities are in the Salt Lake Valley, what cities, major cities are in Indonesia, what's going on in reference to God's work. Learn the areas, strategize, try to recruit other churches to get involved, and invest in these areas in very significant ways. So as I considered this topic of sending, I was initially planning to talk to you on the why. Why should we be doing this? In fact, I considered spending the entire message on this to convince you that sending our own is the best way of doing things. No doubt some of you don't like to send your own. You're like the mom, and all the kids are starting to move out, and you're like, I don't know about this. This is going to be really hard. However, the more I thought about just spending my time telling you why we should do this, I realized that most of you are in agreement, and that type of message would have basically been a nod your head and agree and say, yeah, we should be doing that, Pastor Brian. Also, Chris Anderson on Sunday night gave us some key proofs for why we ought to be doing this. So I'm not planning to devote my message, if you can call this a message tonight, whether it's a talk or a message, I'm not going to devote my time solely to telling you why. I will give you some reasons why I believe we need to prioritize sending our own people to do these things. But I'm not going to stop there. I want to give you both the why, and I also want to give you how we're going to continue to try to do this as a church. Also, this isn't the final word. We need to grow and learn a lot more about how to do this. And so, in fact, we need the whole body to contribute into this conversation and be a part of us developing new and better plans of sending our own into the world. So, that's what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to tell you the why we should be sending our own and how we ought to continue and prioritize this in our church. Now, I need to confess that this is a very hard thing for what I'm doing this evening, because I'm not basically taking a passage apart. Almost all the time that I come here to preach in front of you, it's like, okay, turn to 1 Corinthians 15. I'm going to take 5 verses, and I'm just going to explain it to you. I hate topical messages where I have to pull from all these. I just zero in. What is God saying here? This is what it is. And I'm going to have to do that a little bit, this idea of topical this evening. And so here we go. It's difficult for me. We're going to hit a few verses, but really what I would say is this is preaching, but it's also me just sharing my heart and talking to you this evening. So bear with me, okay? So first of all, let's just talk really quickly about why we should prioritize sending our own. Why do I want this a part of our church? And I'm just going to give you 3 really simple reasons. And the first is this. All through the Bible, we're called to be wise investors. Of course, you know verses like lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust doth corrupt and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. All through the New Testament, it talks about being wise stewards of what you have. One key verse in reference to stewarding and investing is in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. I just put it up here for you. What's going on in this particular text in 2 Corinthians is they're taking an offering to send to the needy people back in Jerusalem. And listen to what it says. Paul says, the point is this. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows bountifully will reap also bountifully. What he's doing is just giving a principle on, you could say, sending or sowing. I mean, imagine, I meant to do this, but things got really busy this afternoon. I meant to bring up a big canister or package of popcorn. You know what? There's 2 things you can do with a big can of popcorn. Now, you're going to tell that I'm not a farmer or anything like that, because I don't think you can really plant popcorn that's going to do a really good job at growing corn, because there's all these different types of corn, I've realized. But you can do 2 things with a can of popcorn. You can pop it all and eat it, but let's just say you could take that whole canister, and let's just say you took a 4th of it and ate it, and you took the others and you planted it. And all of a sudden, as a result of planting all those pieces of corn, you've got you've got tons more popcorn to eat in the future and plant some more, and you can just keep expanding. You know what? When it comes to our people, we can either eat it all and just enjoy each other and have a good time, or we can send our people out and hopefully reap a whole lot more harvest down in the future. probably most of you have made investments in your life. Maybe you have a 401k. For those in Christian ministry, a 403b. Maybe you have invested in certain areas. Maybe you have some mutual funds that you are investing in at this time. We've often been told when you do investing, you ought to diversify. Divide up your investments in the best way possible. Why? Number one, for protection, because you don't want to just have everything in one particular scenario. And the other is basically for profit. You have no idea. If you invest in a bunch of different things and you sow very bountifully in a lot of different businesses, hopefully you're going to reap a great return. Let's just imagine that you had $100,000 to invest in the year 2000. And you were making a decision of what companies to invest in. And you heard about this company like Apple and Amazon. And you just tried this new, really good energy drink called the Monster Energy Drink. You said, do I invest in those? Or maybe you just keep all your money in Blockbuster Video. What should you do? All of us know what the smarter investment was in 2000. If you would have diversified in these particular companies instead of just leaving it all in one place, you would have been in trouble financially. And in the same way, when it comes to investing, our people are just like seeds. And our job is to continue to send them out in order for, it's not about us having a good time here, it's about God's glory and more people coming to Jesus Christ. The concept of sending our own by investing our people in other places is simple, common sense investing. And that is why we have planted Jamie and Jessica in their place of location. Aren't you glad we planted a number of years ago Jamie and John Zimmer in Palau? And what happened there? Marsh and Joy Milliken, they're in Mexico. Patrick and Tracy Cross. Aren't you glad we sent Becca out to Salt Lake and Jared now to join the Siebers who ended up going out there? You know what? It's investing. We're not going to see the results till many years from now. But you know what? That's what we're to do. So it's just simple investing, diversifying your people. That's not the only reason we ought to be a sending church. A second reason, very simply, if you just look at the New Testament, it's this. We must follow the example of the early church. I mean, Chris Anderson did an incredible job. In fact, I waited to kind of lay out what I was going to do this evening because I wanted to see what was going to happen like on Sunday. I was like, okay, I was just going to camp in that one passage thing and go to Acts 15. And what does Chris do? He goes to Acts 15. But what do you find in Acts 15? It's this church in Antioch who gave of their own. Two of their main leaders, Paul and Barnabas, and they send them out. And as a result of sending out those two guys, you have all of these other churches planted. And in fact, the gospel goes to Europe. And ultimately, where did the gospel come from when it came to the United States? It came from Europe. The gospel came to us. Where did it all begin? It all began at a little church in Antioch that was willing to give away some of their own to spread the gospel. So why should we be sending our own? Well, it's the logical investment of being wise stewards of what we have. It's also the example of the early church. And let me give you a third simple reason why we ought to send our own. It's this. We serve a sending God. Isn't he a sender? Did he keep it all to himself? No. Notice what the word tells us in numerous occasions. He gave. In fact, in Romans chapter 8, verse 31 and 32, One of my favorite texts in all the Bible, it says this: what shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own what? Son, but gave him up for us all, how shall he not also graciously give us all things? The idea is this: God gave and sent his most precious possession, his Son. It says in other texts, God sent forth his Son. We ought to be a church that gives of our own so that others could hear about Christ in those vulnerable places. Yes, this is a hard thing to do. Some of us, it's hard to see our best friends. I remember we were all singing down here a number of weeks ago, and I saw numbers of some of the Jessica and Jamie's girls' best friends, and they are just bawling. They're losing their friends for a time, and it's hard. But we have to remember, it's only for a short time. And the neat thing that happens is this: when you send your own, what it does is it creates kind of a vacuum when it comes to leadership that very quickly other people take. One of the things that I just caught, I see Dan and Barb Garvin as they're going to help with this new church plan. And of course, Barb's been teaching in the elementary school, and Dan's been helping out with the ushering for a number of years. And even in the last couple of weeks, what I've heard just through the grapevine is this person's volunteered into this, and this person's doing this. And what is God doing? As soon as God pulls people out, he starts raising up leaders. And more people take those positions. That's what needs to happen. More people working, more people involved. And I'll tell you one thing that's special about a church plant. I mean, as I just listened to David give that challenge and see even that Brazilian young man and his niece, I'm thinking, God, thank the Lord. The gospel is beginning to spread there, even in little ways. And it's becoming vulnerable, and it's giving of your people. So three simple reasons why, okay? You're getting your topical message, so enjoy this tonight, okay? 3 reasons why, as I just think about the Bible, those are 3 reasons why I get excited about giving of our own people. Now, if you want to read significantly, some of you may be interested in kind of the ins and outs, the philosophy behind this. A great book that was suggested to me a number of years ago by Paul Sager is a book by J.D. Greer entitled Gaining by Losing. And it's basically repeating the principle of why it's so good to lose your people, because you gain so much from it. Now, this is a faith thing, but you've got to do this. So if you're interested in reading something like that, let me encourage you to grab that book, or you can borrow mine if you'd like to. But number 1, here are reasons why we ought to be sending our own. What I'd like to finish with is this: how are we going to send our own? And it's kind of simple. It's a simple little recipe, but how do we become a church that sends our own? Now, in my mind, I've often visualized a healthy sending church as operating somewhat like an active greenhouse. Imagine this for a moment. Imagine that I owned a greenhouse with all types of, and let's say my focus was fruit trees. I had numbers of apple trees in my greenhouse, young ones, and numbers of pear trees, and let's say I had some cherries, and I had some peach trees, and I had them in this really good environment that would help them to grow. I'd water them very particularly, what exact amount of water that they would need. I'd make sure that they had the sunlight, the plant food. I'd try to eliminate any type of the insects that would harm any of these particular trees. I would want to create the best greenhouse for all of these trees to actually develop and be ready to be planted in other places, so that at some point I could sell them, so that others who were interested in producing fruit could take some of my trees and transport them into their particular area. And of course, all of us know all it takes is one apple seed to produce ultimately an orchard. It takes one acorn to produce a forest. And what I want to do as a church is I want Lebanon Baptist Church in many ways to be like a greenhouse where we are trying to do everything possible to provide the right environment for all of you to grow, but ultimately that you would be willing and open to if God would have you to be planted in new places. Using this analogy, we've got to send some of our plants out. Now, in order to be sending our own fruit trees out, the first thing that needs to happen is we need to have some fruit trees in the greenhouse. Don't we? If I'm going to send any out, I got to have them in here. So we've got to continue to fill the greenhouse of Lebanon Baptist Church. Now, right now, we probably have, I haven't looked at it in the last few weeks, we probably have somewhere between 300 and 325 members. Of course, we have numbers of shut-ins, so a lot of them can't get out as much. They pray for us. Many of them do very consistently. We have numbers of missionaries that are members of our church that are in other parts of the world. A number of those members are also children who've come to Christ. So you can whittle it down, and you've got an exact amount of adults right now at Lebanon Baptist Church who we have affirmed their salvation, and we're helping them to grow in grace and in the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And over the last month, what we've done is we've just sent out a bunch of trees. And there's empty spaces. Every Sunday, there's numbers of them. In fact, oftentimes there's a number of them right over here. There's some kind of in the back, but there's empty spaces. What do we need to do? Well, we need to fill them, and that's the first thing we do when it comes to how should we prioritize sending our own. The way we do it is, number one, we evangelize. Our church needs to bring people by God's grace to Christ. We don't need to just grow through church transfers. It's nice when people come from other churches, and I love being able to invest, and God in His providence oftentimes brings people here, but you know what? One thing that's especially exciting is when people come to Christ through our people's witness. We need to be sharing the gospel in our community. In fact, on Sunday, Ryan shared with us a challenge of just listing out 3 people. Who are you going to invest in? And I want you to think about this. Who by the end of this year could be the people that are part of this church because you've worked to get them here and bring them to a place of maturity? That's what we have to do. We have to evangelize. We've given you numbers of tools. In fact, if you go on our website, Scott and Josh have laid out this plan called Love Your Neighbor. I mean, it is incredibly written. It is an incredible program, but it shouldn't just be the thing that's on our website. It should be what we eat, sleep, drink. We ought to love our neighbor and share Christ with them. We've given you tools like You, Me, and the Bible. This is just a Bible study that you could do. We've started to share with you visual theology. How could you write the gospel on a napkin with little verses? We've taken you through books like Honest Evangelism and told you how you can cross the pain line. What do we just need to do? We just need to do it, Lebanon Baptist Church. We just need to tell people about Jesus and refill the ranks of this church. Not that so that we can just become a big church. No, that we can continue to train them and send them out. In fact, even with the planning of our master plan, and we thought about our building, I mean, The plan for our building is not to just continue to grow this particular congregation. It's to grow and send out, grow and send out, grow and send out. I know for me, I personally have wanted a renewed vision. Been praying about this, and I'm not ready to, you could say, actually give it to you yet. Just recently, I was recounting to some people how God worked in my life. It was around 2005 when I was a youth pastor. In fact, I did something unusual. I put a picture of my family up here. In fact, I wasn't sure if it was going to be up here because I told my wife I was going to do this right before the service. She says, I'm going to go talk to Patty. So I didn't know if my wife would have talked Patty out of taking this picture out. This is when I was a youth pastor, okay? This is the early 2000s. In fact, this picture is on top of the World Trade Center in June of 2001. I was on a mission trip. I remember as a youth pastor, I ate, slept, drank teenagers. One of the things I wanted to teach our teenagers was to be God-loving, word-filled, ministry-minded disciple makers. I wanted them to learn how to share the gospel with their community. And it was sometime a little bit after this, between this year and 2005, I believe it was, that Jen and I went to a conference at the Wilds where Les Ola shared a message on how I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And he says, what is the all things in your life? What is the thing that you think you could never do on your own, but with God's help and with his strength you could accomplish? He says, I want you to think of one of those things that is the all things that you could only do through Christ and ask him to do it. And I remember as a youth pastor coming home from that particular conference, I says, what's something that I could never do that I want God to do in and through our youth group? What I developed as a result of that was I developed this little program, and I entitled it Code Blue. In fact, I'm going to show it to you. That's what it looked like. Rescuing the Youth of Charlotte. You're seeing some old graphics here, okay? This was big in PowerPoint years ago, okay? But I came home and I said this. I said, God, we have thousands and thousands of teenagers in Charlotte, North Carolina who don't know Christ. And God, I want them to come to Christ. I want our youth group to reach this particular city for the gospel. So my all things was this. I told our teenagers, could God, over the next 12 months, allow our church to see at least one kid saved from 9 public high schools in our area? So what I did was I laid out, I think it was 5 public high schools and 4 public middle schools that were closest to our church. And I told our teens, I said, teens, with God's help, could God help us to see a kid saved through our church from every one of those 9 schools in the next 12 months? Can't God do it? Now, if I told you that, could God do that? Now, when I was telling them that, guess what I was like? Oh, great, I'm putting myself on the line here. But really, I wasn't putting myself on the line. Who was I putting on the line? God, you can do this. And so our teenagers, we started praying and we started asking God that through our youth group that we could see a kid saved from all those schools. That was sometime around August or September. By April, so fast forward 7 or 8 months, we had seen a kid saved from every one of those schools minus one. Mint Hill Middle School. A kid had been saved through our ministry, through 8 of them. And we were doing a special event at our church, and a bunch of teenagers came, and I can still remember all our kids said, hey, Pastor Brian, those 2 girls who are talking to the sponsor over there, They're from Mint Hill Middle School. And so our kids started praying, God, would you save these kids? Would you help them to come to Christ? And I can still remember to this day these two girls coming out of this room where they had talked to one of the sponsors, and both of them had accepted Christ, and our youth group just erupted. God had saved a kid from 9 different public schools in 7 to 8 months. In fact, by the end of that year, we had seen a kid saved from 17 public schools in the area. In fact, I remembered listing them. This right here is 13 of them. All the ones, now I'm colorblind. Is that blue? Okay. Yeah, because it's code blue. What am I thinking? Okay. We had seen them. All of the blue ones were the ones that we had been praying for. The white ones are the ones from other middle school and high schools. I didn't list here. The other 4 schools were 4 elementary schools. You know, sometimes when you have big teen events, the 5th and 6th graders try to sneak in like they're teenagers. Well, we were okay because some of them got saved from those elementary schools. And you know what God did? He did exceedingly abundantly above all that we asked or thought. Let me ask you this. Could God in the next 12 months save a person through this church from Canton, Roswell, Alpharetta, Crabapple, Mountain Park, Milton, Johns Creek, Dunwoody, Atlanta, East Cobb, Hickory Flat, Cumming, let's say Kennesaw, and let's just add to this, Kennesaw State University? Could God do that? Ye have not because you what? You ask not. And so in my heart, God is just churning up in my mind. We're just satisfied with too little. God can do this if we are willing to ask him to do it. And here I am, 2005. God worked in my heart. And you know how quickly you forget stuff like that? It was good for me to be reminded of that my vision just doesn't get too small, that I continue to expand, because you know what? We have a great God, and he's ready to answer our request. So what do we need to do? We need to be a church that evangelizes. We need to keep reloading our greenhouse. We also need to disciple. That's the second thing. We must disciple. We need to work on challenging each other to pursue the Lord. Who are you discipling right now? I remember, I think it was last year, or a couple of years ago, Juan Curling mentioning his mom always asking him, who are you discipling right now? Who are you discipling? And my question to you this evening is this: who are you discipling? You know, the Bible never commands you to be discipled. He commands you to disciple. So don't be the type of person who says, man, I'm not getting discipled by anybody. When is someone going to start discipling me? Well, that's not the command. The command is to disciple. And I'll tell you this, it's often the case when you start discipling somebody, the person you're discipling ends up discipling you back in ways that you never even imagined. So what do you need to do? You need to bring people to Christ by God's help. You need to help them to grow. And you don't know who to disciple? Find somebody. I'm telling you, it's as easy as just pointing and say, I'm going to start investing in that person and start loving on them. So we need to disciple. We need to train leaders. I'll just say that we need to be ready to send our own leaders, just like that church in Antioch. Many of you have noticed in our church partnership meetings, on the front cover of our church partnership meetings, you have something that has like 4 columns now. One would be the 5 pastors, and then people who have a desire to be a pastor, or maybe have been affirmed by other assemblies that have not actually been affirmed by our church before, but they're open to it, and then people who are investigating it. You say, why am I putting that on there? Because I want to keep training people, and I'm okay to continue to swell the ranks of our pastor elders, because you know what I hope? That as God continues to give us more pastors and elders, that we can keep sending them out so more churches get planted. So if you're burdened and you're sensing a call for that, that's what our goal is. I'm excited, even coming up, I haven't necessarily mentioned it to our church family. I think I'm good to do this, but I'm excited that Caleb Sturgis, one of our young men who's grown up here, he's going to be coming to be our next intern. And God has worked in his heart as he's been here and has been studying for the ministry. Now God's going to bring him here for 2 years to continue to allow him to be trained. And wherever God would have him planted one day, that God would continue, that we have to train leaders. That involves evaluation. Jared was talking about it in our earlier session where he has been in candidate training there at Gospel Grace and seeking, God, I want you to prepare me to go do this. We have to continue to do that as a church, and we do this by training leaders. And I've got to close. The last thing is this: we've got to pray. And that goes along with what I said just a few moments ago. Matthew chapter 9 tells us the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Does he say go and send out people? What does he tell you to do? Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. You know what we as a church need to do? We need to pray that God would do this. Raise up people to go and send them into various places. And then the final thing we do is this: we repeat. Okay, so it's kind of simple. You evangelize, you disciple, you train leaders, you pray, and I would just put pray in between all of those points, put it before evangelize, put it in between evangelize, put it next to evangelize. And you do it all, and then you just keep doing it until Jesus comes. And what a day that will be. LBC, our goal with this conference has been that you would once again prioritize sending and supporting missions. Tonight we've seen that you must prioritize sending our own. What are you going to be? You're going to be a church that is just like I remember J.D. Greer in his book. He says, you can be a church that's a cruise liner, where you can just enjoy all the luxuries of childcare. You can enjoy all the good food and potlucks and fellowships and just be all about just having a good time. You can be a battleship. And sometimes those on a battleship, it's basically you're just relying on the people who are in charge or the people at the guns. They're doing it. And hey, we got staff. They'll take care of all of this. It's a little bit better than a cruise boat, but it's still not going enough. He says, you know what we ought to be? We ought to be aircraft carriers, where what we're doing is we're sending our own to take it to the enemy. May God help raise up a church that is continually sending our own. May God help you to do that. You know, we're going to close our service just really simply. We're getting the chance to send some of our own. All of them, they've kind of started the seed group. So I'm going to ask the Huffmans, why don't you guys come up, bring your family. And some of you who are helping with this church plant, I just want to pray for them and kind of close the service. So I know the Garvins, come on up. I know the Newlands. There's some over here. And Calvin, all of you who are helping, a lot of them couldn't be here tonight. Some of them are just helping temporarily. Some are once a month. Some of them are consistently. But come on up. Let's all just have a time of prayer. Isn't this exciting? We're sending our own to help these churches get planted. And you know what? May God continue to fill our ranks to send more out in the days ahead. Will you join me as we close our service and pray for these?